Hey, what's up, folks? This is Tony Brewer. You're listening to or watching, as the case may be, Cogitations. Cogitations is the podcast where we think about things, we contemplate them, we turn them over in our minds, and we discuss them. Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, Daniel writes, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, my countenance changed in me. But I kept the matter in my heart, and we're not going to keep the matter in our heart. We're going to talk about it. And today we're going to talk about patience. I remember in the 80s, there was this old cult sci-fi. Well, it wasn't a cult movie when it started, but it turned into a cult movie. It's back during the sword and sorcery phase of Hollywood, where they was putting out all the Conan movies. Conan the Barbarian, Conan, I don't know how you pronounce it. They had Conan the Destroyer, Conan the Barbarian. I think Conan the Barbarian was first. They had Red Sonja, which is supposed to be a sequel to Conan the Barbarian, but something happened. They didn't have the rights to Conan, so they just had Arnold Schwarzenegger as a king, a barbarian king, and I mean, it was Conan, right? But then they had this movie called Krull, Krull, and while Todd was up here, we were waiting at a light, and somebody mentioned the word patience, and I kind of laughed, and I had this core memory. All right, so when I think about watching this movie as a little kid, and I mean I was young, I remember the sage character talking to the main character who was the hero. He's on the hero's journey, and he's brash. The hero wants to go in and fight, and he would lose. And the sage was very angry at the hero, who incidentally was a prince and would be king. And I remember the sage saying, "There are other kingly virtues other than bravery. Chief among them would be patience." I haven't looked that up to see if that's a verbatim quote, but that's the way I remember it in my head. And it's interesting when you start reading the Bible and you start looking at Scripture, just about every page of the Bible extols the virtue of patience in some way or another. Whether it's patience as we understand it, just to be able to wait contently, or if it's patience as in perseverance, which is actually persevering in the face of hardships and trials. I think of even the idea of sacrifice to God is an exercise in patience. It's delayed gratification. I'm gonna sacrifice comfort in the moment for long-term comfort later. In other words, it's delayed gratification. I've also heard of an experiment that people did where they took and they followed these children all through adulthood. So this experiment was carried out over decades. And so you take a little child and you give them a sweet, you give them an option of one sweet, a marshmallow, a piece of chocolate. I mean, it has to be something the child really wants. And you say, you can have one, we'll say marshmallow. And remember, not everybody likes marshmallows. So if you don't like marshmallows, just replace it for something you like. You can have one marshmallow now, or in 30 minutes, you can have two marshmallows. And the younger a child is able to delay that gratification and think to himself or herself, I believe I'll wait 30 minutes for the two marshmallows, then that would be an indicator, a predictor of future success with like almost certainty, delayed gratification. So patience. And incidentally, there it is. my desk ate my Bible here. We're going to go to 2 Peter, and we're going to read the virtues. We're not going to talk about the virtues. In times past, recently, I've done a entire podcast on the virtues. So I'm going to read in 2 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 5. And besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to your virtue knowledge, to your knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness. and to godliness, brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, charity or love. Folks, patience is the virtue that's the precursor to godliness. And what that means is you're able to delay gratification. I'm going to live my life on this earth, and I'm going to sacrifice pleasure of today for pleasure of countless tomorrows later. That's all the Christian life is. It's just an understanding of being able to delay gratification. Do you want to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season? Or do you want to, because it feels good, doesn't it? That's Romans 13, make no provisions for the lust of the flesh, or make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Why are there admonitions and warnings like that in Scripture? Because sin is fun. Sin feels good, but it is momentary. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, they're not of the Father, they're of the world. The world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But if you are of God, you will abide forever, because you've delayed that gratification of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And thus is the introduction to our podcast. We're going to talk about patience, about waiting on the Lord. Now, those of you that are coming in and giving and putting comments, man, that's awesome. We've revamped a little bit of what we do. I've had to kind of lean into the fact that I concentrate better and produce a better podcast that's easier to follow if I wait till the end of the information that I've decided to disseminate. And it won't be long before I stop telling you that, because enough of us will be here and we'll know. So let's talk about patiently waiting on the Lord. If you're here this morning, thank you so much. We're so glad that you have decided to join us, and leave a comment and like and talk to one another in the comment section. And after we get through this information, which won't be very long, we'll go into the comment section and I'll take your comments. Also, one of the reasons you're getting this is because I'm like a little bitty child. I play, because of my son Anthony, this video game called Elden Ring. It's been out 2 years now. Yeah, it's been out 2 years now, I think. We have downloadable content, a game expansion. In fact, the DLC, the downloadable content, the testers and the people that have gotten it early are saying that it's like Elden Ring 2, like it's a whole nother game. I am so excited. Tomorrow, I'll be playing that Elden Ring DLC. And as I've said in the last few weeks leading up to the DLC, I can't wait. Of course, that's a very foolish statement. Of course I can wait. I'm not a time traveler, so I'm forced to wait. But I don't have to wait very patiently. I'm not very content waiting on the DLC, but that's okay. That's something that's frivolous and it's silly, and it doesn't affect my day-to-day operation. But what about waiting for the contentment and the pleasure of being with God for eternity? Can I delay the gratification in the moment, the pleasures of sin for a season? Can I sacrifice my life to Christ and give my life on earth to Him in order to receive my life back at the second coming, to be able to spend eternity with God the Father, God the Holy Spirit, and God the Son? That, my friends, is a very good question. I think I can do it if I keep on going like I'm going, and I think you can do it too. Patience is a prominent theme throughout the Bible, highlighting the virtue of waiting on the Lord in various contexts, all through Scripture. And it includes deliverance, salvation, and of course, delayed gratification. Obviously, the verse that you would think about is at the very end of Isaiah 40. We sing a song. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And then the song, teach me, Lord, to wait. Now, if that is your prayer, teach me, Lord, to wait, teach me, Lord, to be patient, you better be careful, because He may give you something in your life that makes you be patient. I remember being on the way to a funeral, to graveside service in a funeral procession. I'll get it out in a minute. there was a train, and we stopped at the train track. Well, the train slowed down and came to a stop for a moment, not too long. And I remember thinking to myself, I had a quiet chuckle. Somebody in this funeral procession has been praying for patience. Well, be careful about praying to God to teach you patience, because he just may do it. Now, the psalmist also frequently expresses a deep longing for divine intervention. Psalm chapter 40 and verse 1. The psalmist writes, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me. He heard my cry. Well, this verse shows that waiting is an active form of faith. It emphasizes the steadfastness of God's timing, and steadfastness in God's timing is essential. We need to understand we're not in charge of when, who, what, when. Well, hold on a second. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. We're not in charge of that. We're only in charge of ourselves. We can only control how we react to the things that the world throws at us. And if we put our trust in God's timing, if we put our trust in God's help, if we put our trust in God's deliverance, it'll be like whenever I was a little child in that mid or early 80s Caprice Classic, driving or riding in the passenger seat with my father, driving down highway, I think it's 55, that goes from Dyersburg, Tennessee to Memphis, Tennessee. Heavy rain, heavy thunderstorm. And my dad never told me exactly how worried he was. I know as an adult how stressful that would have been. But I just laid there in that seat, curled up like a dog, looking at the window and how the rain hit the window, being mesmerized, not a care in the world, because I knew, as trite as it sounded, as it sounds now, this too shall pass. And my daddy's got this. I waited patiently on my father, and he protected me while we were in that Caprice Classic, and he saw me through that storm. If we understand this concept with our earthly father, how much more so can we understand the concept of deliverance from our trials and tribulations from our faith, but by our faith in our heavenly Father. So let's talk about patience and salvation. Well, patience plays a critical role in the New Testament, particularly in awaiting Christ's return. And salvation is promised if we wait patiently, if we're found faithful. Romans 8:25, listen to it. But if we hope for that we have seen not, then do we with patience wait for it. What about you, am waiting patiently for that blessed appearing. Wait a second. How's that go? I can't quote it without quoting I'll just quote the whole thing. For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared unto all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world, looking for that blessed hope and glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. I am patiently scanning the horizon, metaphorically, of course, for Jesus' return. I know that no matter what kind of hardships and trials that I face, my suffering is either going to be alleviated by the expiration of my life, or by Jesus coming to get me out of this situation to take me to heaven. And I know he's going to take you to heaven as well. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. Paul motivates these early Christians to sustain faith and patience, particularly when God's promises are not immediately apparent. Go read 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. It's all about patience. Paul is telling those people in Thessalonica, Jesus' return is not necessarily imminent. All right? For those of you that are concerned with Jesus' return, don't worry about the people that have died. They're not going to miss out on heaven. Whenever Jesus returns, those that are in the grave will arise, will follow them, and we will meet him in the air and there forever remain with him. And at the end of chapter 4 there, 1 Thessalonians, Paul actually says, comfort one another, brethren, with these words. Which words? No matter what kind of junk you're dealing with in this life, Jesus is going to come back and get you out of it, whether it's resurrecting you from the grave because your life is expired, in which you're no longer suffering, you've gone to Abraham's bosom, or he's going to come back while you're alive and he's going to snatch you up in the air, and it doesn't matter how bad your life was here on this earth. It will be orders of magnitude and an exponential orders of magnitude better in the second life, in heaven. So we need to have patience in salvation, and that's waiting contently and persevering. Both usages of the term work. Same way with the psalmist. I waited patiently on the Lord, and he inclined unto me, and he heard my cry. Patience here is both waiting with contentment, contently waiting, and waiting with perseverance. Now, patience and delayed gratification. I've got 3 verses here. Proverbs 25:15 highlights the wisdom and patience for achieving superior outcomes. Listen, by long forbearing is the prince persuaded from a soft tongue, and a soft tongue breaketh bone. Folks, you don't have to get back at somebody. You don't have to get everything you need the first time you ask. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded. Maybe sometimes we forbear one another. Maybe sometimes if somebody does something in our presence we don't like, maybe we just observe the Passover and we just forbear, and in a very, very soft and loving and tender way, we kind of surface that, and then we'll change somebody. But if we go at them, we're going to entrench them even deeper in whatever behavior we don't like. And it doesn't have to be unscriptural, sinful behavior. It just could be behavior we don't like. There's nothing wrong with having a healthy boundary. For instance, all through growing up in the South and everything, when you went into somebody's house, normally you left your shoes on unless your shoes were dirty. That's just everywhere we went. Some folks wanted you to take off your shoes, and guess what? It's their house. We took them off. But here in Canada, you don't go into somebody's home without taking your shoes off. In fact, a lot of people will, if they go to somebody's house for like a dinner or something like that, they'll bring some house shoes. I've never seen that before in my life. But guess what? Whenever I first got here, now, when I first started coming up here in 2016, I didn't know. We was only up here for a week or two at a time. So whenever we went to somebody's house, we'd leave our shoes on, wouldn't think twice about it. Nobody said anything. They forbeared. But now that I live here and I go, like, for instance, a good friend of mine, he and his wife will go over their house quite often and eat dinner and stuff like that. Well, it dawned on me, everybody that would go over there, all these shoes would be lined up, and I'd still be wearing my shoes. And I just ask about it. And very gently and very lovingly, he's like, yeah, we prefer you take your shoes off. So we started taking our shoes off. Now we take our shoes off everywhere we go, or, well, every time we go over to somebody's home. Forbearance, a soft tongue. Now, granted, it didn't break any bones, but it broke my heart. In other words, it when I say broke my heart, it didn't make me feel sad. It broke my heart as in it tenderized my conscience. Proverbs 25:15, that's a good one to keep in your pocket. Proverbs 13:11 cautions against the quick accumulation of wealth. Proverbs 13:11 cautions against the quick accumulation of wealth. You ever heard of a get-rich-quick scheme? You know, a lot of people figured out with which stocks and stuff that you could invest in, which stocks and such you could short, and Google what it means to short a stock. This happened with GameStop. These people were used to making this really, really quick money by shorting stocks. Well, they figured out, look, GameStop, the corporation in the United States, is prime for this tactic. So they set it up to happen. And then a bunch of people on Reddit said, everybody go buy GameStop stock, and we'll keep these Wall Street cronies from getting rich off of this. This is why you don't do get rich quick schemes. So all the people on Reddit band together and bought GameStop stock, and it drove the price up, and all these people lost money, which is odd. You need to Google how that works. I'm not sure I understand it completely, but that's why we don't do get rich quick schemes. Listen, wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. Wealth should not be gathered by vain means. And I think about all these young girls that are having these OnlyFans, and they're making, some of them $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month. Well, they're going to, once their beauty fades and they're no longer desirable because there's going to be another crop of 18 to 25-year-old girls on OnlyFans, they're going to be dried up, bitter, not able to form interpersonal connections, and not able to pair bond with a man, and they're going to be outcast of society, and they're not going to have that money. And so they're going to be 60 years old, dried up, worthless, no children, no family, nobody to take care of them in their old age. They're going to be drags on society. They're going to be living in destitution because the only skill that they have had an expiration date with youth. Vanity. Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished. Now, if they would have put all the time and effort into learning how to sell real estate, learning how to do accounting, learning an actual skill, labor, then they would be fine. Sadly, they got their wealth through vain means. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 21 is another one. It further warns against get-rich-quick schemes. An inheritance may be gotten hastily at the beginning, but the end thereof shall not be blessed. Fast money is never good. Think about people that win the lottery. What typically happens to them? They're typically worse off after they win the lottery than they were before they win the lottery financially. Now, let's talk about the modern payoffs for patience. What would be the modern payoff for patience? Well, for one, you'd have financial stability. Saving money instead of spending impulsively. It can lead to greater financial security and ability to make future investments. You ever heard that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? It's because of delayed gratification. If you want to get rich, do rich people things. If you want to be poor, do poor people things. It doesn't matter if you make $10,000 a year or $1 million a year. If you make $1 million a year, do poor people things, and you will lose your money. So what about academic and career advancement? Well, investing time in ongoing education and career growth results in better opportunities and higher satisfaction in your job, a sense of accomplishment. You'll be validated. You'll be sought after. You won't have to totally rely on inner validation, although you could. You'll be recognized in your field, and you'll be like, hey, you're an expert. Come up. That takes delayed gratification, academic and career advancement. Think about the biggest podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan. He was an overnight success that was about 2 decades in the making. Did you catch that? An overnight success about 2 decades in the making. That's the way a lot of overnight successes are. You don't see all of the grueling work that they put in, all of the training that they take. You just see the success. It's kind of like an iceberg. You have an iceberg with 10% of the iceberg stuck up out of the water. That's what you see. You don't see the 90. So you got 100 tons of ice. You see 10 tons. You don't see 90 tons of work and sacrifice and education and preparation. So modern payoffs of patience, academic and career advancement. Well, what about stronger relationships? You know, developing relationships slowly builds deeper trust and connections. I think about whenever my wife and I were courting, dating. It doesn't matter what you call it. We courted, and we started out as friends. We'd hang out. We went on some stuff where it was me and her and some other people. And I tell you, the night that everything changed, we were going to go to this place called the Travelers Inn for breakfast. It was a place in Hickman. That's not right. South Fulton or Fulton. No, it was in Fulton, Kentucky. Sorry. Fulton and South Fulton are on the border between Kentucky and Tennessee. Fulton is in Kentucky. South Fulton is in Tennessee. Travelers Inn was in Fulton. And they had, at the time, a contract with the railroad where the railroad paid them to stay open all night so their employees could have a place to go and get breakfast. Well, we would take advantage of that. This was before some of the all-night restaurants came to Northwest Tennessee, Southwest Kentucky. And 10 or 15 of us were supposed to go. Well, it turned out the folks that were supposed to go couldn't, and it just ended up being me and LaBeth. And we sat there and talked in that restaurant till the morning light. And I dropped her back off at her house. I went to work. I went to work at a pretty difficult job, having no sleep. I slept for about 30 minutes or an hour after work was over. I took me a shower. I called her up and asked if she wanted to hang out again. And we just started hanging out after that. And then it took quite a long time to develop a romantic relationship, although that's what we were doing looking back. It just took time. And we could have tried to force it, but we wouldn't have been able to develop that strong of a relationship. Same way with friendship relationships. Be very, very wary of a person who tells you that they love you the first time they meet you. That is a person who is mentally unhealthy and doesn't have a good sense of boundary and doesn't have a good sense of patience. Because as deeply, and I don't believe they're lying. I believe they're telling the truth. But what you'll find is when you throw up one boundary that they don't like, as deeply and intently as they loved you, they intently hate you that deeply. I know a fellow right now, the first time I ever met him, he told me I was everything but the second coming of Jesus and how awesome I was. And now he's going around telling people how terrible I am. And I'm talking about me because I relate to me. I'm sure every one of you have similar stories. I remember when I was in Bay, Arkansas, a fellow on the internet called me up and said, I wanted to call you up and tell you how awesome you were. It's not the words you used, but he asked me a Bible question, and I gave him an answer, and he compared me to being more intelligent than Guy N. Woods. And I said, well, Guy N. Woods covered a little deeper than I did. Just because I gave you a simple answer doesn't mean please don't compare me to Guy N. Woods. Well, after we got off the phone, I knew. I marked in my head like that guy's going to be an issue. Sure enough, it wasn't about a month later, I put something online about Scruple that he didn't like, screenshots, all this, that, and the other, about how terrible I am. I'm a false teacher. I'm soft on sin. I don't have a backbone. I don't have any integrity or character. I'm a coward because I wouldn't take his phone call. I'm a coward. Okay. I know I'm saying this because I know you have experienced this. Be very wary of somebody that rushes a relationship, whether it's friendship, romantic, or anything. But now, what about improved health? Y'all, this one right here hurts my toes. Choosing healthy habits over quick fixes promotes long-term health benefits. You know what? I know what I need to do in order to be healthy. I know what I need to do in order to get down to my weight that's prescribed by the doctor. 30 minutes a day, every day in some kind of physical activity. That's all it would take. And a reasonable calorie counting. And in my ideal weight, I could eat 3,000 calories a day. and be at my ideal weight. I think people underestimate how big I am. I'm not talking about how fat. I'm talking about if I was at my ideal weight, I'm just a huge guy. I was about 15% body fat at 6'2" and 290 or 280 pounds. Huge. And I run a 5 flat and a 40. Now I'm 380. I've lost about 20 pounds. I'm 380 and 6'2". So I could eat 3,000 calories and I would go down to 380 to 280, especially if I just did 30 minutes of exercise per day. It's consistent, but you got to sacrifice a little bit of your day for long-term results later. So delayed gratification, patience gives us improved health, and then personal development. We need to have patience in learning new skills. Hobbies enhance our personal growth and opportunities, so we need to have patience in them. I go back. I remember the first podcast I ever started was the Life and Godliness podcast, and I was literally talking into the rear end of a. I would record the podcast like this. Hello, this is Tony Brewer from the Life and Godliness podcast, powered by and whoever it was that was powering it. But anyway, the sound was terrible. And once I started learning, I felt that I ought to be like a professional sound engineer at the top of his game, just starting out. And that's one reason why I've obsessively gathered so much audio equipment, because I foolishly was thinking, well, I need to get better equipment. Instead, I should have spent all that money. And when I say that, I should have spent all that money on room treatment and training by someone that knew what they were doing. Now, I'm kind of glad it worked out that way, because I'm self-taught, and I did get a consult from a professional, and they told me just how good it was, which was really nice. It was validating, and I know they were telling me the truth, because we were going to set up multiple sessions, and they said I didn't need it. Now, what I do need is some training with voice acting so I can narrate better. But as far as just the audio engineer, he said there's no reason for you to spend money on hiring me for your audio stuff. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So, personal development. You got to have patience, because if you don't have patience in learning these new skills or hobbies, enhancing your personal growth and opportunities, then you're going to give up. I'm obsessive. I didn't give up, and I also wasn't very patient with myself. Just by sheer force of will and accident, I stumbled into what I'm able to do now with the audio stuff. But it would have been much better if I would have given myself a break and been patient with myself. And anyway, long story short, we are what we are and we do what we do, and it would have been better if I would have been patient. But then emotional resilience. So managing stress and setbacks patiently builds emotional strength. How do you deal with tragedy? How do you deal with unexpected calamity? How do you deal with unexpected plan changes? I cannot remember this proverb. It's not a book. It's not a proverb from the book of Proverbs. It's a proverb that we made up. It's a proverb that we made up. I say we. It's a proverb that mankind, not we as in Tony and somebody else, but we as in mankind made it up. He who is very, very flexible shall never be bent out of shape. The idea is you don't need to be so rigid as not to be able to go with the flow. Folks, that's patience. You had a goal in mind. Something come up that causes you to delay the achieving of your goal. Folks, that's delayed gratification. That's patience. If you learn patience in that situation, your emotional resilience, you won't be so stressed and anxious. You'll just be able to go with the flow. And my granddaddy, Luther Kendall, he always had this same response to calamity or something like that unexpected. He smiled, oh, well, that was it. That was his response. And he just pivoted and we took care of it. Finally, understanding patience can help us with our achievements and the quality of them. Quality achievements. Patiently completing tasks often results in higher quality outcomes and satisfaction. I remember building pole barns with my uncle, Ricky Ragsdale. I remember the satisfaction of after a 30 by 50 or a 30 by 30 or whatever pole barn was built. At the end of that day, we'd all be sitting there, we'd have a little snack before we hit the road to go home. And when I say eating a little snack, we would travel up to 2.5 hours one way. And once you hit 2.5 hours, anything outside 2.5 hours, you need to rent a motel. But if it's within 2 to 2.5 hours, by the time you find a motel, get your shower, and get laid down in bed, you're like, man, I could be home right now. So we would just drive back if it was within 2.5 hours. Well, that would mean we would eat a little can of Beanie sausages and crackers or Beanie Weenies or something. And we would look at this pole barn that we built, and there was just an extreme sense of satisfaction. Patiently completing tasks always results in higher quality outcomes and satisfaction. I remember completing one pole barn, and my uncle was like, why are you taking so much time squaring that building? It's a pole barn. It can be 6 inches out of square and still be fine. And I'm like, no, Luther Kent, sorry, I can't see. Brock Kendall and Luther Kendall are not related to one another. Different set of Kendalls. All right, sorry, I'm almost done. I'm gonna get to comment section. Y'all, I really like getting the comment section. It's my favorite part of live streaming. But anyway, oh yeah. So my uncle was like, it can be 6 inches out of square and still be fine. And I'm like, Unc, I've tried to make corner mold fit on a pole. It's much better if you take a little time in the beginning. Now, the last pole barn that I built, the owner was there, and he said, I got a bone to pick with you about your pole barn. I'm like, oh no, what happened? He said, well, I come down here and measured it, and I checked it for square. He said, your pole barn's out of square. I said, oh no. Now keep in mind, this was 30 foot by 50 foot pole barn. And I said, oh no. I said, I don't see how we're out of square. And he smiled. He goes, yeah, you sucker, you're out of square. You're an eighth of an inch out of square. I'm like, then I realized what he was doing. He pointed up the hill. He said, son, my house ain't that square. Well, let me tell you how easy it was to put the trim on this pole barn when it was only an eighth inch out of square. You understand me? We spent a little bit of extra time in the beginning to save us a lot of time in the end. So there are practical reasons to extol and embrace and cultivate the godly virtue of patience. So these things that I've said, these biblical teachings affirm that patience, it involves active, faith-filled waiting, and it incorporates trust, hope, reliance on God's perfect timing. And those who wait faithfully on the Lord, they find their reward significantly enhanced, highlighting the sweetness of the results. And that works both in a spiritual setting and a physical setting. I hope something said here has sparked you to look at yourself and ask yourself, am I as patient as I need to be? And if you're not, well, have a little patience with yourself and figure out how to cultivate that virtue. Now, let's go to the comment section and see what we've got. I am so happy that all of y'all are here. Man alive, it's too much sometimes for me. Diana Harden says at the beginning of the podcast, says, patiently waiting for this podcast. Tony, good morning. And Terry Crooks, good morning to you. Bish White, good morning. John Exum, he's going to do his first podcast for the Biblical Broadcasting Network. I've got a small mixer, mic, and headphones, and should be good to go. 10-4, and listen, just as an aside, if you're going to spend any more money, the next money you should spend should be room treatment. Don't let somebody talk you into buying a better mic. Don't let somebody talk you into buying a better mixer. If you've got a mixer that works, if you've got a mic that works, you've got a mixer and a mic that work good enough. I can take this cell phone right here and I can put it in a treated environment and I can make voiceover quality recordings. Now, a person at the top of their game, a professional, could tell the difference. But it wouldn't be a big enough difference not to use the recording. So don't let anybody talk you into buying a cool. Granted, don't get me wrong. I've got the coolest mics. I've got the coolest equipment. It's all vanity. It's all vanity. If this whole place burned down and I had to start over with a $500 budget, I could probably make just as good a sound. I could make as good a sound. I could make my sound quality so good on that budget that the average person couldn't tell a difference. So don't let anybody talk you into spending any more money. The very next dollar that you spend on your podcast should be for room treatment if you desire to spend more money on your podcasting. So good luck, John. Where am I at here? Uh-oh. Oh, right here. Good morning, Connie Barden. And again, Bish Waite says he's glad to connect. Scott Beck says, don't forget Kung Fu. Patience, grasshopper. As quickly as you can, snatch the pebble from my hand. I loved Kung Fu. David Carradine. I couldn't think of that to save my life. I think it was supposed to be Bruce Lee, but they thought Bruce Lee was too Chinese looking, so they used David Carradine. I don't know. I don't understand that. Some say don't pray for patience because a trial is soon to follow. I believe it. Hello, Missy Malone. I'm doing really, really well. Dana Harden said, my son Monroe pre-ordered the new Elden Ring and is eagerly awaiting time to play it. He's currently in grad school and doesn't have much downtime. I'm sorry. I'll pray for him, Diana. And thank y'all so much for the folks, Christopher and Lasaif on the Facebook. Thank you. And speaking of stocks, do you see investing in stock as gambling? No. It's not the same as like betting on a horse race. Investing in stocks is purchasing a share in a company. And if the company is successful, you make money. If it's not, you don't. Like for instance, Aaron and I we're in this together 50-50. Now, we don't have an LLC. We don't have anything because it's not big enough to deal with. I told Aaron and I discussed this. Once we get to a certain amount, he and I are going to meet. I'm going to fly to him, and we're going to set everything up in the U.S. We're going to have a U.S. checking account. We're going to form an LLC, and we're going to make it legitimate. And so then that would mean I own 50%, Aaron owns 50%. But what Diana would, what if, Diana, what if you wanted to help us out and say, well, listen, I would like to buy in for 10%. And so we say, well, you can buy into for 10% at $2,500. Now, if we turn the world upside down and we make a very profitable company, well, let's say there's 100 shares. I would own 45. Aaron would own 45 shares. I would own 45 shares, and you would own 10 shares. And we would figure it out a value. So if 10% is 2,500, so that's 25,000. So if we sold the company, you would get your 2,500 back, and Aaron and I would get 50. The remainder split between us. But what if we grew the brand till it was worth $100,000? Well, that's not gambling. That's just us doing hard work, and you recognize the hard work, and you facilitated our hard work with $2,500. So you would get 2,500 times 10, and we would get our value times 10. Anyway, it's not gambling. It's just ownership of a company, you know. John Exum. Oh yeah, Dave Ramsey. I love Dave Ramsey, but yeah, investing in a. Oh yes, yes. Sorry, John. So there is a way to try to invest in stocks that is a get rich quick scheme, like shorting and stuff like that. I don't. I wouldn't do any of that. In other words, if you play that game in the stock market, you need to only play with money that you would feel no remorse over setting on fire and burning. Okay? That's like if you loan, like if John Exum needed $1,000 and I loaned him $1,000, I wouldn't loan somebody $1,000 unless I could just give them $1,000. Well, if you play the stock market the way some people play the stock market, you don't need to play the stock market unless you're able to just wad that money up and burn it. Dave Ramsey, when it comes to the stock market, he's talking about mutual funds, IRAs, stuff like that. And it's a slow dividend, it's a slow burn, and just as Dave Ramsey says, it's a get rich slow scheme. Very good. And MD Radoy Hassan Zahad. Well, we're glad you're here. Election is a great show. Connie Barden. She said, that's the perfectionist in you. It has paid off. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Petrus Simonis, hello. Good to see you. And, of course, no, Brock and I are not related. Luther Kindle is a different set of Kindles. And what a delicacy. Sausage de Vienna. Yeah, that's it. I love Vienna. I love Viennese sausages. We call them Vienna sausages. Let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. That's the podcast right there, Ben, isn't it? That's the podcast. John Exum. Yeah, those barbecue Viennese sausages hit the spot. I ain't going to lie to you. Connie Barton says, when we built our house, which we did ourselves, it was out of square an eighth of an inch. My brother-in-law would make sure we redid it, and I'm glad he did. Oh, dude, on a house, yeah. Let me tell you something. So it is true that a pole barn can be, there's a lot of tolerance for a pole barn. But if you make a house and you start with your house out of square, everything in your house is going to be messed up. All of the rooms, all of the door facings, everything. It's better to take the time in the beginning. Do you find it challenging to hear yourself or listen to yourself? No. But it's because I'm a glutton for punishment. I listen to everything that I do in order to critique myself and get better. That's why I've drawn the conclusion that I can no longer, as we go through the podcast, I can no longer jump back and forth from the comment section to the information that I would want to disseminate, because I was starting to notice it made for good podcast. It made for good live streams when you're watching it and you're experiencing it, but it made for terrible consumption of the content after the fact. And I've got to make sure my content is somewhat evergreen. So even if you don't have the atmosphere of a live stream, you need to be able to go back to the live stream and have at least the meat of the podcast logically arranged and that information logically disseminated in order for it to have any re-listenability. Plus, if I wanted to, I could put this live stream, I could download it and put it into a video editor, and I could chop it up into just the information, and I could repurpose that video. So that's why it's I guess to answer your question, it's yes and no. I'm not crazy. I'm not a narcissist. I don't get joy out of listening to myself. But the joy that I do get from listening to myself is not in the listening of to myself, but in the information that I garner that allows me to improve. Children equals patience. Whenever my wife, whenever I was single, I prayed for patience, and and God in heaven sent me a wife. And then I prayed for patience again, and God blessed us with a baby. And then I prayed for patience again, and we were blessed with a 2-year-old. I prayed for patience again, and we were blessed with a teenager. I prayed for patience again, and we were blessed with a young adult. I don't know who said that first, but I rather like it. How did I do an entire podcast on patience and did not mention Job? Since he wasn't mentioned in the podcast on patience, Job would like a word with you, brother. I concur. Yeah, you have heard of the patience of Job. Job was all about delayed gratification, was he not? And think about the extreme duress under which Job was living. The momentary pleasure would have been his unaliving himself. But he traded a miserable existence in the short term. Look at how he was blessed in the end. That's it. You have heard of the patience of Job. And in that situation, it's contently waiting and perseverance. James 5:11. Yeah, good call, Scott. I cannot believe I did an entire podcast on patience and never mentioned Job. Well, folks, I hope that you decide to support us in some way. There's 2 ways to do it. There's a way that doesn't cost you a dime, and a way that you could sacrifice a little bit of your monetary wealth and gains to help us grow. So if you want to do it for free, get a subscription on Substack and share the content to your social media. Like, subscribe, and share. Help us grow the Facebook page. Help us grow the YouTube channel. Yeah, well, so that's the thing, Connie. The word patience encapsulates both endurance and waiting contently. That's why. In fact, I think that's why patience is used. In the course of a few hundred years, the English word patience has been kind of hyper focused, and we use the word patience today as I'm contently waiting. But it encapsulates both of those meanings: enduring hardship, endurance, and contently waiting. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. Whenever you read James 5:11, think more on endurance, remaining faithful, than you think of contently waiting. Because although Job was content to let God be in charge of the earth, he still had some questions for God. And by God in heaven, wouldn't you? I know I would. And I'm not saying you, Connie. I'm just saying to you as the listener. But anyway, back to how to support us. Free, interact, and share the content. Subscribe on Substack. Subscribe on YouTube. Some of our shorts are taking off, and we've added about 15. We've added double-digit subscribers in a 24-hour period just off of one short. So that always helps. And then, of course, if you want to support us monetarily, go to the show notes, and there's ways to do that there. But you can also support the merchandise store. Yeah, if we don't have questions, we likely aren't thinking. That's absolutely correct. So, folks, I'm going to get off of here. God bless every one of you. Was it Diana that her son or relative was downloaded the Elden Ring? Have them, if they're on PlayStation 5, see if they'll reach out and send me a friend request, and I can help them in any way that I can. I'm rather good at the game. I hate to say that. That's a brag, but just statistically, I'm way better than average. And PvP, player versus player, that's my favorite. I love invading. I like fighting gank squads. I like the 2v1s, and I love luring invaders and doing fighting 1v1s on against all the tryhards that have their optimized builds for invadings. If you know, you know. Anyway, God bless every one of you. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share. And folks, this has been Tony Brewer with Cogitations. We'll catch you